And now we get into section 107, which is pretty long, not the longest one we've had so far, but very long. Given over a long period of time, I can tell you that, and we'll follow the logic of the Joseph Smith papers on this one. So the first time we ever see this revelation pop up is actually back in 1831. So this is 4 years ago. And it is sandwiched in between sections 69 and 70 as what they call a partial revelation. So the earliest copy of this that we get is from Revelation Book 1. It's in the handwriting of John Whitmer, and it changes in the midst to Oliver Cowdery on the top of the second page. The partial means that it begins on what we would now call verse 59 and goes to verse 100, or the very end of the Revelation. So the beginning part of it wasn't received until 1835 when it was about ready to be published. But just so that you know that we only got the back part of it back in 1831. We also get a copy found in Orson Hyde's copy, which is really in the Newell K. Whitney papers at BYU, again, handwriting of Orson Hyde. We get a copy in Revelation Book 2. This is the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams, and it is found in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. The full revelation as we have it today appears in 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, section 3, and it says on priesthood. And we also find it in the later manuscripts history of the church. There you go. So some introductions to this revelation. Revelation Book 1 only says a revelation given at Hiram Portage County, November 11th, 1831. There was no introduction in the Hyde copy. Revelation Book 2 only says revelation given November 1831 in Cayuga County, Ohio, regulating the presidency of the church. Okay. There are some section heading differences, and even the dates are different here. So this is, I think, one of the more significant modern revelation changes that we see. So in 1981, what you used to read was revelation on priesthood given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Kirtland, Ohio, dated March 28, 1835. This is from the History of the Church, Volume 2. On the date, names of the 12 men in council, confessing their individual weaknesses and shortcomings, expressing repentance, and seeking the further guidance of the Lord. They were about to separate on missions to districts assigned. Although portions of this section were received on the date named, the historical records affirm that various parts were received at sundry times, some as early as November of 1831. Now, in modern scriptures, the section heading reads thusly: Revelation on the priesthood given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Kirtland, Ohio, about April 1835. Although this section was recorded in 1835, the historical records affirm that most of verses 60 through 100 incorporate a revelation given through Joseph Smith on November 11th, 1831. This section was associated with the organization of the Quorum of the 12 in February and March of 1835. The prophet likely delivered it in the presence of those who were preparing to depart May 3rd of 1835 on their first quorum mission. So before the 12 went out to teach and to do their big mission, this was received. So the historical introduction gives us a lot of good stuff here. It says, in March of 1835, Joseph Smith and the 12 apostles decided that because of the many pressing requests from the Eastern churches, the apostles would conduct a series of conferences in the Eastern United States. These conferences were held, quote, for the purpose of regulating all things necessary for the welfare of the branches of the church in those areas. It appears that sometime before the 12 departed on the 4th of May, 1835, to begin holding these conferences, Joseph Smith presented them with this instruction, which outlined information about priesthood and church governance. The document indicated that there were two major divisions of priesthood in the church, the Melchizedek priesthood and the Aaronic priesthood, and explained the responsibilities of the 12 apostles, the 70 bishops, and other officers in the church. This instruction was apparently meant to aid the 12 in their regulation of the eastern branches, while also providing detailed information about the responsibilities of priesthood officers. Like the earlier articles and covenants of the church, the instruction became an important document establishing significant doctrines in the governing bodies of the church and on the priesthood itself. So some of this revelation actually elaborated on section 84, which we've already done. The instruction on priesthood compiled information from previous Joseph Smith revelations. Much of the instruction came from a revelation Joseph Smith had dictated in November of 1831. According to some observers, Joseph Smith dictated other parts of the instruction as an 1835 revelation. Some of the instruction also elaborated on ideas first presented in a September 1832 revelation, indicating that Joseph Smith was gaining new understanding into concepts of priesthood and leadership. Oliver Cowdery, who assisted in calling the 12 and giving them their charge as apostles, was probably involved in the instruction's preparation. Brigham Young later remembered Joseph Smith spending, quote, 2 hours laboring with Elder Cowdery to get him to write what Young called a revelation on priesthood, probably this instruction. Indeed, when the instruction was published in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, it was designated as an instruction on priesthood. So why don't we use the date from the 1981 section heading? Well, Heber C. Kimball remembered that Joseph Smith dictated the instruction on priesthood at a meeting of the 12 one evening after the apostles had been called and most of them had been ordained. Kimball's account places the meeting sometime before the first week of April, 1835. A later Joseph Smith history placed this dictation on the 28th of March, 1835, and referenced a document recounting a meeting of the 12, where after a period of general confession, they made a written request that Joseph Smith obtain for them a revelation of God's mind and will concerning our duty in the coming season. The history states that Joseph Smith then dictated this instruction. However, this appears to be based on a misdating by the history's compilers, since the request to Joseph Smith, which was copied into Minute Book 1, is dated 28th of March, 1836, not 1835. In fact, Joseph Smith was not in Kirtland, Ohio in March of 1835. So, yeah, there you go. You got to write your names and dates down right. You just got to do it. All right, this is also kind of an upgrade to the Articles and Covenants, so we get this from the historical introduction. Although not covering all operations of church administration, the instruction captures information about the coordination of church governance between bishops, the presidency of the high priesthood, and newer offices such as the High Council, the 12 apostles, and the 70. It also gives specific names for the two priesthoods in the church, Melchizedek and for the higher priesthood, and Aaronic for the lower, and explains why these two names were applied to these priesthoods. The instruction explains that the presidency of the high priesthood has the right to officiate in all offices of the church and further illuminates the role of the bishop of the church, explaining that the bishopric is the presidency of the Aaronic priesthood. Essentially, this document updated the Articles and Covenants and other revelations on church administration and codified the roles for the new offices. So I would argue, personally, I believe that most of how the church really runs today comes from Section 107 instead of the Articles and Covenant. Because like I said, it just rounds it out. And as they have said, it kind of rounds it out. Some content and footnotes for this. The Revelation shares this with us. There are two divisions or grand heads. One is the Melchizedek priesthood and the other is the Aaronic or Levitical priesthood. Footnote 2 for this says, other religious leaders around this time also posited the existence of different types of priesthood. Alexander Crawford, a Scottish minister living in Canada, believed that three priesthoods existed anciently, a patriarchal priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, an Aaronic priesthood, and the priesthood held by Jesus Christ. Alexander Campbell of the Disciples of Christ also believed that the tribe of Levi held one priesthood and that Aaron and his sons held a high priesthood. So this idea of different priesthood heads and even what they were named after was not entirely unique to the church, but as you can see, also not the same. We also get this from the text. High priests, after the order of the Melchizedek priesthood, have a right to officiate in their own standing under the direction of the presidency in administering spiritual things, and also in the office of an elder, priest of the Levitical order, teacher, deacon, and member. Now, you're going to see this a lot in these revelations, so I thought this was a nice footnote here. What does member mean? Well, member here may refer to an official member of the church, a term used around this time to refer to a man who held any priesthood office in the church. It's kind of a blanket term, just to say member in good standing, more or less. Where do bishops come from? Well, we get this. The bishopric is the presidency of this priesthood and holds the keys or authority of the same. No man has a legal right to this office to hold the keys of this priesthood except he be a literal descendant of Aaron. But as a high priest of the Melchizedek priesthood, he has authority to officiate in all the lesser offices. He may officiate in the office of bishop when no literal descendant of Aaron can be found, provided he is called and set apart and ordained under this power by the hands of the presidency of the Melchizedek priesthood. Footnote 9 for this says, the earliest extant copy of the November 1831 revelation states that, quote, a bishop must be chosen from the high priesthood, unquote, and does not include the information here about literal descendants of Aaron or about the bishopric holding the keys of the lesser priesthood. In the March 1835 issue of the Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate, Oliver Cowdery stated that the priesthood of Aaron was conferred upon Aaron and his seed through their generations, and that if the literal descendants of Aaron were no more, then this priesthood was lost from Israel unless God bestows it upon another family. Thought that was interesting. And this is still done today. So if you are called to be a bishop of the church, that call comes from the first presidency, and you have to be a high priest in the Melchizedek priesthood, the high priesthood sort of portion of that. That is still done to this day. We get some instructions about first presidency. It says, of the Melchizedek priesthood, 3 presiding high priests chosen by the body, appointed and ordained to that office, and upheld by the confidence, faith, and prayer of the church, form a quorum of the presidency of the church. Now, this is a very different view of the presidency. So footnote 12 says this. At this time, the presidency of the high priesthood consisted of Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, Sidney Rigdon, Frederick G. Williams, Hiram Smith, and Joseph Smith Sr. Apparently, the presence of only 3 of these men was necessary to form a quorum of the presidency. Now, I don't know if we would ever go back to that, but that's the idea, is that the presidency was this body, and then a few of them, at least 3, had to be around. In this day and age, we only have 3 at a time called to that, but that was kind of makes sense, quite frankly. We get this from the text. It is the duty of the 12 in all large branches of the church to ordain evangelical ministers as they shall be designated unto them by revelation. Footnote 19 for this. Evangelical ministers likely means the office of patriarch, which Joseph Smith Sr. held. In a blessing recorded by Oliver Cowdery in September of 1835, the patriarchal priesthood is referred to as the evangelical priesthood. In addition, paragraph 28 of this instruction is included almost word for word in a recorded blessing that Joseph Smith gave Joseph Smith Sr., which states that as one ordained to the patriarchal priesthood, Joseph Smith Sr. was to gather together his posterity just as Adam had done. There is no record of the 12 ordaining any evangelical ministers while preaching in the eastern United States and upper Canada. However, what's funny is this is kind of flipped, where there is no presiding patriarch over the whole church anymore. There are only patriarchs or evangelical ministers, if you will, apparently, in each one of the stakes of the church. So that's kind of flipped around in recent times. And if you haven't seen the earlier version of this, I do a whole part of an episode about patriarchs and about how the most recent patriarch, I want to say, passed away less than 10 years ago. This is 2025, we're recording this, and he was like well into his hundreds. But he was the last presiding patriarch. He was emeritus at the time. But anyway, the whole script on this has been kind of flipped. All right, from the text, we also get this. 3 years previous to the death of Adam, he called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, who were all high priests with the residue of his posterity, who were righteous, into the valley of Adam on Diamon, and there bestowed upon them his last blessing. And the Lord appeared unto them, and they rose up and blessed Adam, and called him Michael, the prince, the archangel. And the Lord administered comfort unto Adam, and he said unto him, I have set thee to be at the head. A multitude of nations shall come of thee, and thou art a prince over them forever. Footnote 32 for this says, this paragraph is included almost word for word in a blessing Joseph Smith gave to Joseph Smith Sr., which was recorded by Oliver Cowdery in September of 1835. And it says, this is what it says, for he shall assemble together his posterity like unto Adam, and the assembly which he called shall be an ensample for my father, for this it is written of him. And then you get this Revelation section that I just said. And then after that it says this, so shall it be with my father. He shall be called a prince over his posterity, holding the keys of the patriarchal priesthood over the kingdom of God on earth, even the church of the Latter-day Saints. And he shall sit in the general assembly of patriarchs, even in council with the Ancient of Days, when he shall sit and all the patriarchs with him, and shall enjoy his right and authority under the direction of the Ancient of Days. And this was a blessing episode where Joseph Smith gave blessings to his father, his mother, and a lot of that was recorded in the Patriarchal Blessing book, and that was written by the hand of Oliver Cowdery. And so the Ancient of Days, as we interpret it in the church, is Adam or Michael, which are synonymous together. So anyway, that was a very interesting insight. That he definitely attaches his own father to sitting in council with patriarchs through the ages, which I thought was interesting. Lots of footnotes comparing Revelation book 1 and 2 are in here, like just a ton of stuff back and forth about, oh, they use witched and they use who and, whatever. I'm going to skip over those. Now, one thing that's very interesting to me is that there is not any person to the church who is exempt from the council of the church. And so I find this interesting. It says, and inasmuch as a president of the high priesthood shall transgress, he shall be had in remembrance before the common council of the church. And footnote 48 to this says, that is, a council headed by the bishop, who is the common judge. So nobody's above the law here. That's written out in section 107. Let's talk about bishops over the Aaronic priesthood. It says, also the duty of the president over the priesthood of Aaron is to preside over 48 priests and sit in council with them and teach them the duties of their office or is given in the covenants. This president is to be a bishop, for this is one of the duties of this priesthood. So you get 48 at a time, and if you have more than that, you have to split it up. I don't know if you know that, but you do. Footnote 53 for this says, while a bishop was to preside over the priests, William Cowdery, who was not a bishop, was ordained on the 15th of January, 1836, quote, to preside over the priests of the Aaronic priesthood in Kurland. The practice of calling a president over the priests who was not a bishop continued in Nauvoo. However, as this instruction outlines, the bishop was still the presiding authority of the whole priesthood of Aaron. So apparently they used to have like priests, presidents that were not bishops, which is kind of a no-no today, but that's what they did. All right, what we would now call verse 32 reads this. It says, and again, the duty of the president of the office of the high priesthood is to preside over the whole church, and to be like unto Moses. Behold, here is wisdom, yea, to be a seer, a revelator, a translator, and a prophet, having all the gifts of God which he bestows upon the head of the church. Footnote 53 for this says, in an account of a 5th December 1834 meeting of the presidency of the high priesthood, Oliver Cowdery provided an explanation of the office of the president of the high priesthood. He stated, quote, the office of the president is to preside over the whole church, or to be considered as at the head, to receive revelations for the church, to be a seer, revelator, and prophet, having all the gifts of God, taking Moses for an ensample, which is the office and station of the above President Smith, according to the calling of God and the ordination which he has received, unquote. Joseph Smith was ordained to the president of the high priesthood on the 25th of January, 1832. So this is a while ago. And let's button it all up and talk about 70s. It says this, and it is according to the vision showing the order of the 70 that they should have 7 presidents to preside over them. Footnote 56 for this says, at the 14th February meeting where the 12 apostles were designated, Joseph Smith stated that the meeting had been called because, quote, God had commanded it, and it was made known unto him by vision, unquote. Joseph Young, who was called as one of the presidents of the 70, later remembered that a week before that 14th February meeting, Joseph Smith had told him and Brigham Young that he had received a revelation to appoint 12 apostles and to designate the 70. And that's all that we have for section 107. So as we move forward in our next portions here, we're going to be talking about section 108 and a very intense and very interesting story to me about a conflict between Joseph Smith and his brother William. So stick around.